So our series is called Gift Wrap that we're going into for Christmas. Now this is a little different of a series. I know we went through gratitude and I went through Hosea and Sermon on the Mount, and those are more of kind of just like a walk in a section of the Bible. We do this one a little differently, and I know many of you have heard the story of the birth of Jesus. It's kind of, you've heard it many times. You get to Christmas and you're thinking, well, what are we going to talk about at Christmas? It's like, how about the birth of Jesus? Because that's what we always talk about at Christmas, right? But it's so important to go back and remember and think through and remind ourselves. And I know that many of you have heard this hundreds of times, but I'm going to tell you, the more times I hear it, the more I enjoy hearing it. It's just beautiful to listen back on. And so we're kind of presenting this in a different way. We're calling it Gift Wrapped because we celebrate in Christmas the greatest gift that humanity was given, Jesus. The greatest gift that humanity was given. But it's not just important that Jesus came. We're not just talking about that. We're talking about in the way in which he came. The events that surrounded it speak so much to who Jesus is and speak so much to who the giver is. Now, some of you are probably, I know we've all wrapped gifts at some point in our lives to give to someone. And now some of you probably really care about how a gift looks. You make sure all the paper is creased, like in just the right spots, and it looks good, and there's a nice bow on every gift, and always, who is that person? Just like you want it to look really good. Okay, we got a couple of those. Who doesn't care at all? Like, you just don't care. Wow, those hands shot up a lot faster on that one. It was like, you don't even care that we're talking about this right now. You're like, can we just move? No, but you just don't care. But the reality is that sometimes the gift does, how it's wrapped doesn't mean a lot. But sometimes how it's wrapped speaks a lot about who the giver is. And Jesus coming, how the story of the birth of Jesus, all the things that it was wrapped in, and all the things that, it speaks a lot about who Jesus is, who God the Father is. And so that's what we're talking through today. But I have just little something for us here. I looked up just the Christmas wrapping fails here. And so there's just a couple of them here. I thought you may appreciate this. For those of you who don't care about how it's wrapped, these are for you. See these first ones? Like this is good. I thought this might have been one of my gifts that I had wrapped in the past, because I thought this looks, these first two, they weren't really trying here. There was not a lot. It could have been children though, maybe. You did that one. Okay, there we go. It's Leon. Okay. And then this one, I thought this one is really, I bet it's a stapler. I bet that's what it, yeah. Even the chain on the bike is right. You can't see it that well, but that's impressive. That took a lot of time. And then you have this category of almost, like this is the category of we ran out of Christmas wrapping supplies last minute. And so, and just so you know, I do have a child named Evan, but I did not, this was not me. I found this online. Okay, I want to make that clear. This one, it may take you just a second to get this. There you go. Yeah, you got it. You got there. Okay. I didn't realize they even had Halloween gift bags like this, but there it is. Okay. And then this one's creative. That's good. They ran out or probably didn't plan enough, but they just drew it in. I like that. This one at first looks like it's really wrapped nice. And then you realize it's just duct tape on there. If you couldn't see it very well, that's just duct tape. And I got to say, that took probably more effort. The bow looks great on there. It's even kind of cut the edges of the string. I don't know what the string, anyways, of the bow. Yeah, it looks good. And then this one is my favorite right here of all of them. Just take it in right there, yeah. Just a lot of, if you can't see it very well, a lot of zip ties, about 40 or 50 zip ties, and it says, "To idiot sister from brother." Just, But you see, it speaks a lot about who the giver is in this, right? Obviously, this is brother, and this is probably a relationship where they goof off with each other a lot. And this is what we're talking about this Christmas season, is that the way that Jesus came, how he was wrapped, how the story is wrapped, speaks so much about who he is. Today, we've got 4 different things that we're going to use. things that he was wrapped in. We're going to talk about scandal today, and then Marquise next week. We talk about promise, and then glory and love. But scandal, so we've wrapped up a box each week to kind of display. And when I thought of scandal, this is kind of what came to mind. I had somebody, Brittany, helped to wrap this for me. She was like, "You got to wrap this in tabloids," because that's what I think of when I think of scandal. I was like, "That's good." I don't know what comes to mind when you think of the word scandal. But it's like something, it's almost a gasp. I can't believe that happened. That thing, whatever that is, that public thing. And we all love scandals. We do. We love hearing about it. Not in our own lives. We love hearing about other people's scandals, right? We find something exciting about that. But the way that Jesus came, there's a lot that's really scandalous in that. And maybe not in the way that you're thinking scandalous, but there's a lot that's in it. So the word scandal, I looked this is the best definition I thought I could find of this, was damage to the reputation or character caused by public disclosure of immoral or grossly improper behavior, disgrace. Now we know that Jesus never had any immoral behavior, but many considered his behavior grossly improper. That what Jesus did, how God showed up as a human, is just weird. Like what was he thinking? What is going on? I mean, have you ever really just sat, you've heard the Christmas story, the birth of Christ story many, many times. Have you ever just really sat and thought about how ridiculous of an idea it is that the Creator would be birthed? So that's the first scandal that we have in this is we got three different ones to talk about. The scandal of a birthed creator. And you may think, well, wait, I didn't know Jesus was creating things. I thought he was born. And no, it's very clear. He was part of the creative process for all of humanity. In John 1, we see this, and we'll look at John 1 and then also in Colossians. John 1, 1 through 5, in the beginning, the word, and this word for word, doesn't really make a lot of sense for us to say word. It really means the logos is the word, but it's like this essence of all things. The beginning, the word already existed. The word was with God, and the word was God. And so the word is a he, so it's a person. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. So all the things that you see that are created were created through him and by him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. And then moving on to verse 14, it says, so the Word became human, or became flesh, some versions will say, became a person as we see a person, became human, and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son. In Colossians, Paul says it this way: Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything. Sometimes we think that, well, God in the Old Testament is very different than Jesus. Just so you know, Jesus was God in the Old Testament. He was there at the beginning. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. For through him, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see, such as thrones and kingdoms, rulers and authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him and for him. He existed before anything else, and he holds all creation together. Okay, so I want you to think about this idea that the ridiculous notion that God is creator, and then God chooses to become a microscopic cell in the body of a young Jewish girl and go through a birth canal of someone he created to hang out with humanity. Have you ever really just kind of stopped and wrapped your head around that? How scandalous of a notion that is. There's a guy, he was speaking, John Dixon was speaking about giving a lecture at a university on that God is wounded. we serve a God who has been wounded by his creation. And during the lecture, a Muslim man rose up and he says, how preposterous was the claim that the creator of the universe should be subjected to the forces of his own creation? That he would have to eat, sleep, go to the toilet, let alone die on a cross. He went on to argue that this was illogical, that God, the cause of all causes, would have pain inflicted on him by any lesser beings. I mean, you ever thought about Jesus didn't just come and we see him as an adult, but he grew up and he was in diapers and he got sick and he told jokes and laughed with people and sat with people. We see him eating with people. But that he went through the experiences that we went through. The creator of all things comes and sits among his creation. John Dixon said whenever the man said that, he's like, I didn't really have a great response right then. And then I thought about it more and I said, what the Muslim denounces as blasphemy, the Christian holds as precious, that God has wounds. That our Savior came and sat with us, came and took a place among us, even though he didn't have to do that, but he chose to do this. And so the other part of this is the scandal of humility. The scandal of humility, that Jesus chose to come in humility, to take on humility, to show us, not just that he showed us this, he set the example in what humility should and could look like. And Philippians, we see in chapter 2, Paul writes, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interest, but take an interest in others too. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. So who's the example in this? Well, it's Christ in humility. Though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being. When he appeared in human form, he humbled himself in obedience to God and died a criminal's death on a cross. Even in Jesus' last days on earth, you think about what would you do if you knew you only had a couple days left to live, and Jesus spends that time washing feet of his disciples, showing us what a true servant leader looks like in complete humility. And I'm going to tell you, this is a dangerous thought, but if I were God, okay, and I was going to come to earth, and you too, if you were like, I'm going to come to earth and be among my creation, I would have at least been born to like a rich family. I mean, come on, something, like give something to be a little better, but instead that everything about the story is wrapped in humility. That Jesus chose this, and you have to think like, why this way, which we're going to get to, but why would he choose to do this? And so it's scandalous in that he is God, he is creator and chose to be among his creation, and also that he chose a lowly position of humility. And then the last one, probably the one that was pointed out to him the most, that the people attacked him on the most, is that he was the scandal of a holy God who puts up with sinners. Jesus, if you are a man from heaven, if you are the Son of God, why do you hang out with tax collectors, with sinners, with prostitutes, with the worst of the worst of the worst? And this is what all the high and mighty, self-righteous religious people would say is, who does he think he is? He claims to be righteous, he claims to be holy, but then he hangs out with all these very unholy people. Over and over and over. He experienced this all through his ministry where this was said about him. Matthew 11:19, the Son of Man, on the other hand, feasts and drinks, and you say he's a glutton and a drunkard and a friend of tax collectors and other sinners, but wisdom is shown to be right by its results. Jesus was and is a friend of sinners. Praise God for that, right? Because that's me and you and all of us. There's a story. I read a book this week. I listened to it, but I think that counts as reading. Okay, that's it. In my book, it counts as when you listen to an audiobook, that counts. When I was driving back, we'd been out of town, had a great week of Thanksgiving, celebrating with family. I'm driving back. I listened to this book called Unoffendable, and I highly recommend the book. Fantastic, fantastic book. I like to listen to books at like 3 times the speed to get through it as quick as possible. But it was still good. I got a lot of good stuff out of it. He tells a story in here about this guy from a different book. He references this, and so I'm going to read some of this guy's story. Tony Campolo, and maybe you've heard this before, but to me this just fits so well with what we're talking about, that Jesus is God who hangs out with people that nobody wants anything to do with sometimes, and that is all of us in that. But Tony tells this story of he was traveling for work one time, and he had to travel to Honolulu, Hawaii. And he's jet lagged when he arrives. He gets there, and so he ends up, he can't sleep, and so he goes to this diner. And he's there at the diner at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and he said, I'd gotten my coffee and my donut, and he was like, this place was kind of gross. The guy working the diner, I asked for a donut, and he just picks up a donut and hands it to me. You're like, maybe some gloves or something? Just one of those. And he's eating the donut there and drinking his coffee. He says, and I want to read some of this so I don't get it wrong. He says, as I sat there munching on my donut and sipping on my coffee at 3:30 in the morning, the door of the diner suddenly swung open, and to my discomfort, in marched 8 or 9 provocative and boisterous prostitutes. It was a small place, and they sat on either side of me. Their talk was loud and crude. I felt completely out of place and was just about to make my getaway when I overheard the woman right beside me say, tomorrow's my birthday. I'm going to be 39. Her friend, in quotes here, kind of responded in a nasty tone, well, what do you want from me, a birthday party? And it kind of made fun of it a little bit, like, what are we supposed to do about that? Tony said in that moment, he said, when I heard that, I knew right away. I made a decision, and I sat and waited until all the women had left, and I called over the guy behind the counter and said, do they come in here every night, those ladies who were just in here? Yes, they do. He said, what about the one who was sitting right next to me? She said it was her birthday. Does she come in here? Yes, her name is Agnes. They're in here every night. And because I heard her say that tomorrow's her birthday, and I want to throw her a birthday party. Can we throw her a birthday party? He said the guy behind the counter was like, this is a great idea. I love this. And so they made plans. Like the guy's wife made a cake, and he came early at like 2, seems very early. But at like 2 and started decorating. Tony decorated the diner and made a sign for her, and it was like, happy birthday, Agnes. He said, and the word must have gotten out because at 3:15, every prostitute in Honolulu was in the place. It was wall to wall prostitutes and me. That's the way he says it. So he says, when Agnes arrived, though, with some of her friends, she walked in and immediately began sobbing. She just fell apart. Just the thought of, how does someone love me like this? How can someone chase after me like this? And I love this story because I think we've all been in that place. In the middle of our sin, in the middle of our shame, we think, how can God, would he even come after me? He goes on to share the story that the guy behind the counter gives her the cake and gives her a knife. And was like, you got to cut the cake. And she didn't even want to cut it. She didn't want to like mess up the cake. She's just trying to capture the moment. She said, can I take the cake home first and then I'll come back? I think she wanted to show somebody. He doesn't really explain all of that. And so the guy was like, yeah, I guess. And so he walked out the door, and then he's like, it was weird. There was this point where nobody really knew what to do. When the door closed, there was a stunned silence in the place. Not knowing what else to do, I broke the silence by saying, what do you say we pray together? Looking back on it now, it seems more than strange for a sociologist to be leading a prayer meeting with a bunch of prostitutes in a diner in Honolulu at 3:30 in the morning. But then it just felt like the right thing to do. I prayed for Agnes. I prayed for her salvation. I prayed that her life would be changed and that God would be good to her. When I finished, Harry, the guy behind the counter, leaned over the counter, and with a trace of hostility in his voice, he said, hey, you never told me you were a preacher. What kind of church do you belong to? In one of those moments when just the right words came to me, I answered, I belong to a church that throws birthday parties for whores at 3:30 in the morning. Harry waited a moment and then almost sneered as he answered, no, you don't. There's no church like that. If there was, I would join it. I'd join a church like that. Wouldn't we all? Is his question at the end. What an awesome story, right? You know, we get caught up in people's sin, and we really are good at pointing out other people's sin, and we get too high and mighty and self-righteous, and we're like, I don't even know if I can be a part of that or be around that person or whatever this is. And Jesus sat and ate with everyone. And you think, how does a holy God sit with people who seem the farthest from him? And it's not that Jesus sinned. It's not that he partook in that. We know that Jesus didn't. Jesus did something much greater where he became their sin. And that may sound a little weird. Paul words it exactly like this. God made him, talking about Jesus who had no sin, to be sin for us. Jesus came to die, to become our sin. He knew we couldn't fix ourselves. You know, we don't even like to call it sin. We want to stay away from that. I heard someone say, we like to call it mistakes. I made a mistake. I'm not a sinner, I'm a mistaker. Because mistakes are just, they're little mess ups and they can be corrected and we can correct it ourselves. And you know what? If I made a mistake, you make mistakes too, so you should just get over my mistake. And it's really easy to kind of justify that. A holy God cannot just get over sin, though. A holy God must bring wrath to sin. And so that's why Jesus came to take that on for us. And I know this may seem a little weird. We're talking, like, wait, Terrence, shouldn't we be talking about mangers and stuff here? You know, this is Christmas and baby Jesus and Mary and Joseph, and we are going to get to all of that stuff in the next couple of weeks. But yet the point of the greatest scandal in that Jesus came to live here is that he came to die here. That he came with the purpose of death for you and for me. That's why this season is so special, because of what Jesus came to do. That he came to take on our sin for us. And he didn't just take it on and look down at us and point at us and yell at us. No, he sat among us. He loved us. He endured with us. He found joy in us, though, and walked with us. And still, after all of that time spent with us, because I've spent some time with some people, you may think, I don't know about dying for these people. He still chose to die for us in the middle of all of that. And what a joy that is. That's why it's the greatest story ever. That's why it's also a scandal. No one would expect a holy God to do this. There's a guy who's a Christian apologist, and he's recently died in the last couple of years, but he was a Muslim, grew up Muslim. His name is Nabil Qureshi. Wrote a lot, spoke a lot, phenomenal. You should go look up some of his stuff. And when he was converted to Christianity, his goal was to speak to other Muslims, really. That was a big part of his goal, about Christianity. And he's speaking to a friend of his who was a skeptic. And part of what they asked was the same question that I think many of us ask, or that we look at and we say, how could a holy, divine, majestic God, humble himself, not even humble, it's like that's not even the right word, but, bring himself so lowly to come here and be with people. And he responds with this story, and he asks his friend, he said, okay, so imagine you are dressed up and you're going to a banquet. And you've gotten yourself together, you look good, you smell good, you got it going on. Like you got it, and you get in your limo or whatever it is, you're riding to the banquet. And then you look out of the car and you see that on the side of the road, your daughter is drowning in a pool of mud and just sinking lower. He says, do you get out and save your daughter? She's like, of course. He said, okay, but even if it meant that you're going to be late, and of course, that you're going to have to get muddy, of course I would do it. He said, okay, and also let me just ask this. Do you send somebody else to help, or do you go and help yourself? She's like, no, I go myself right then. He's like, that's what God did. That's what God does for us. If you, being a human, love your daughter so much that you are willing to lay aside your dignity to save her, how much more can we expect God, if he is our perfectly loving Father, to lay aside his majesty to save us? That is the beautiful part. That is the beauty of the Christmas story. This is what Jesus did. God with us came as creator to be born among his creation, getting diapers changed, living a humble life, a difficult life at a difficult time in a difficult political climate, and to be crucified, to die, to hang out with sinners because he loves you. That is the beautiful part of the story. And so we celebrate that. That's why this is the best season of the year. I love Christmas season. We celebrate that together today. As we close out, we're going to go into a time of prayer and reflection, and we have communion available during this time. And I would encourage you, if you've never made the decision to give your life to Jesus, to do that today. Just pray to him today. Your next step would be baptism. I've already talked to you about, we're baptizing a lot of people next week. What's one more or 12 more or something? Come on. We would love for you to participate in that. And if you want to talk to somebody about it, we'd love to talk to you about it too. We're going to have some people during this time, in this time of prayer and communion. We'll have some people standing in the front and the back that would love to pray with you about anything and everything, whatever you have going on. This is the place to ask for prayer and to pray over one another. So I want to encourage you in that. But let's go ahead and pray together as we close out today.